Ah, the PlayStation Vita. You were a beautiful thing gone from our lives far too soon. Or was it? Spanning two console generations, the PS Vita had a lot of potential. So where did it go wrong, and why didn't it get the same attention given to other handheld systems? Today we explore the potential that was the PlayStation Vita in a special, retrospective episode. The PlayStation Vita, also referred to as the PS Vita or simply Vita, was Sony's follow-up to the largely successful PSP. As such, it featured a few upgrades from its predecessor. Beyond the stronger internal hardware, the Vita included a touchscreen on the front, a touchpad on the back, rear and front cameras, and a second analog stick, bringing its control scheme more in line with those seen on larger consoles. On the software end, several features were also added, such as a dedicated party system, a near feature to help find players in your area playing the same games and also allow you to drop virtual goods in real-world coordinates that could then be picked up by other players in a form of geocaching, and remote play. You may have heard of this little thing called game streaming. It's a pretty hot topic right now, and it seems like everyone is trying to get their foot in the door. Thing is, Vita was stepping on through all the way back in 2011. Remote play worked by syncing up your PlayStation 3 or 4 with your Vita. From there, you had full access to the console remotely. Admittedly, it worked best over a network, but in a pinch, you could do it over the internet if you had a strong enough connection. In fact, some models of the Vita came with a SIM card slot, making it 3G capable on its own. This meant that not only did you have access to the Vita's library of games, but the PS3 and PS4s as well, assuming you could get over the form factor. Unfortunately, due to the lack of dedicated L2R2 and L3R3 buttons, these had to be awkwardly remapped to the back touch panel or front touchscreen. The Vita did allow for minimal customization, but ultimately your best bet was to pick up an adaptive case that mapped physical buttons to the back touchpad. However, for some games, this wasn't an issue. A fair few games actually released in parallel on the Vita and its big brothers. Better yet, many of these games featured cross-save, meaning as long as you had a PS Plus account and backed up your saves on the cloud, you could carry those saves over between your Vita and your PS3 or PS4. This not only meant that you could game on the go without having to worry about wonky internet connections, but also that the Vita version of the game would capitalize on its touchscreen and touch panel to create intuitive solutions to adjust for fewer buttons, rather than just remapping them. Even better, some games offered cross-play, allowing you to enjoy your game safely on the toilet while your friends sat comfortably on their sofas. But the Vita was more than a simple peripheral for the flagship PlayStation consoles. From popular franchises such as Uncharted and Killzone to new IPs like Gravity Rush and Soul Sacrifice, the Vita had a rich library all its own. Beyond that, while it no longer supported UMDs, it was backwards compatible with the PSP's online library, and also shared the PS3's access to PlayStation Classics. While many of the Vita's most popular games were first-party titles, it had no shortage of third-party support, which, interestingly enough, extended long after Sony ceased support for the system. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and sadly that came all too soon for the Vita. Despite its impressive hardware and strong cult following, Sony made the decision to stop producing first-party games only 4 years into the Vita's life. This was largely due to low sales numbers. So why didn't it sell? First of all, the Vita was expensive, nearly $100 US more than its main competitor, the 3DS. This was largely due to the original Vita's OLED screen. On top of that, while it did boast some popular franchises such as Uncharted, it didn't have a game with the mass appeal of something like Nintendo's Pokémon. Sony did try to rectify this by releasing a second model 2 years later featuring an LCD screen. This helped reduce the price by $50 US, but still left it at a higher price point than the 3DS. Another problem was the Vita's dependence on proprietary accessories. Both the charging cable and the memory cards were unique to the Vita. In contrast, the 3DS used standard micro SD cards. The newer Vita did switch to a micro USB charging cable, but maintained its proprietary memory cards. Another issue with the Vita was that, unlike its bigger cousins, the Vita was locked to one account. This meant that you were limited to whichever region's store your account was tied to. It also meant that all save files and trophies were shared. While this might not seem like a huge deal, it was a common complaint among owners of the Vita. Finally, in 2018, Sony announced that they would cease all production of physical games. The same year, they stopped including Vita games among their monthly free games on PS Plus. A year later, production on the Vita itself ceased, and in 2020, its games were delisted from the PSN's online store. Today, the only way to find Vita games are to locate second-hand physical copies or access the online store through the PS3 or Vita's own store apps. In many ways, the Vita was well before its time. The fact that the original model supported an OLED screen is something that not even the current Switch features, and while the 3DS required a stylus, the Vita already had full touch support, not only on the front, but on the back as well. All the way back in 2011, Remote Play was pioneering game streaming, predating the Google Stadia by 8 years. And while you can now play many classic games for the original PlayStation on PlayStation Now, the Vita not only had you covered, but had you covered anywhere you wanted to go. And so, with a tear in our eye and a hole in our hearts, we remember you fondly ironically named Vita. Your death came all too soon.